I want to say a few words about Chris Shelton, our speaker for tonight. He's an author, podcaster, researcher around the subjects of coercive control, thought reform, and destructive cults. After his escape from the Church of Scientology in 2013, Chris wrote Scientology, A to Xenu, an insider's guide to what Scientology is really all about, which is still available on your website, I believe. He also appeared and served as a consultant to the Emmy-award winning Scientology and the Aftermath with Leah Remini, which some of you may have seen on HBO, I believe. On his YouTube channel and popular podcast, Sensibly Speaking, Chris spills the secrets on destructive cults, explores the recovery process, and interviews psychologists, sociologists, and neuroscientists. He holds a master's degree in the psychology of coercive control. Now, I'm going to tell an anecdote, as I normally do, before the speaker gets on. When I met Chris. Chris is here from Denver, Colorado. He's flown in all the way from Denver to give the talk tonight. And I met him in Denver. Thanks for coming out. And when I met Chris, I asked him what he did, and he told me he's a podcaster. And I said, oh, okay. Well, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, well, a lot of people are podcasters. A lot of people want to be podcasters. I'm like, okay, I don't know what that means, but sure. So I invited him out to lunch, and we went to a diner, which is not far from where I was living in Denver. So we meet at the diner, we're eating, we're talking, everything's fine. And then somebody across the way says, excuse me, are you Chris Shelton? And we look over, there's a woman sitting there. I recognize your voice. After he says, yes, I am Chris Shelton. Oh, I love your podcast. And goes on and on and on in adulation. I'm like, okay, he really is a podcaster. Anyway, I will say this, please hold your questions till the end. I'm sure you'll have a lot of them. There's a lot of interesting information Chris is going to talk about tonight. So without further ado, Chris Shelton.
Okay, hi everybody. First off, thank you, Greg, and everybody here for coming out and coming to see me tonight. I appreciate that. I hope that I make this worthwhile for you. I am a former Scientologist, and that's probably the most interesting thing there is to know about me. But I've tried in the process of leaving that group to actually, I really like the ideals of this group as communicated here tonight by Bart, because compassion, tolerance, and understanding has been my messaging from day one of starting to speak out publicly against Scientology. And the reason for that is because it's sort of the mirror to, the opposite end of the spectrum from what groups like Scientology are all about. And that's the problem with such groups is we call them not just cults, because if you look up the word cult in a dictionary, almost any group could be considered a cult to one degree or another. And there's various language around it. And so what we use is the term destructive cult. Makes it crystal clear we're talking about a problem situation. And Scientology is such a group. Let me ask you, well, first off, the thing about Scientology, as Greg was telling me before the talk here today, is that it actually has everything. You got controversy, you have celebrities, you have dramatic court trials as are happening right now. You have an insane belief system. You have aliens, you have abuses, and you have a charismatic but quite unhinged leader. And it's all in that little package. And I was part of it for the greater part of my life. So I've got a few things to say about it. First off, just so I'll kind of know, how many folks come here having heard something about Scientology? Okay, a little bit, maybe some a lot, some a little bit. South Park? Good. Documentaries maybe, Going Clear, Scientology, The Aftermath. I had the honor and privilege of being on that show twice. It was a lot of fun. Leah, by the way, is exactly in real life like she is on that show. Serious go-getter. Okay, so and right now, of course, it's in the news because there is a trial of a prominent Scientology celebrity out in Los Angeles, and this week has been the first week of that trial, and it was a sexual assault rape trial against Danny Masterson, and he is a celebrity Scientologist. And so we've been following that trial very, very closely because not only is it about him as an individual, that is the case. The Church of Scientology is alleged to, by multiple victims of him, to have actively covered it up. And having worked for that group and knowing even some of the people involved whose names are coming up back from when I was in, I find that very credible. So we'll see how that trial rolls out. Now, one thing you might be surprised to know just from the get-go about things like Scientology is you know certain things about it, you hear things about it, you watch documentaries about it, and you think, oh, so you believed in Xenu. And I didn't. And I was in Scientology for 27 years, and I never heard that word because that's confidential. And it turns out, oddly enough, as I've learned over the years, I got out in 2013, is that y'all know more about it than most people who are in it, because all that stuff is super, super hush hush confidential, and you can't know about that. And only about, the numbers worked out, only about 5% of people in Scientology have ever heard of Xenu. So when you confront a Scientologist and go, oh, you're one of those weird people who believe in space aliens, they're going to look at you with a straight face and completely honestly tell you, no, I don't. And your attack on them only reinforces the fact that of their belief, because they know more about it than you do. And you're like, no, I know more about it than you do. But you can get into that argument and struggle of that. And that's one of the things I've learned is really not a good thing to do with a cult member, is argue with them about their belief. Probably isn't going to go so good. So, but it demonstrates one of the things about these groups that is kind of interesting. And that is that their structure, their hierarchy, their way of organizing is generally in levels of knowledge, levels of awareness, levels of indoctrination, if you will. And Scientology has that. It's called the Bridge to Total Freedom. Love that. It's the best twist of phrase ever, because Scientology is all about anything but freedom. And unfortunately, I live that. And I lived through an awful lot of nonsense. I grew up in Scientology, and I was physically and mentally abused in Scientology. And yet I kept doing it. And I'm going to talk tonight about some of the reasons why. Okay, so growing up in it, right? What is that like? Well, it's not so dissimilar to what it's like growing up in any religious household. You have a belief set that you're indoctrinated to, and you believe because of that the world is a certain way. And you interpret the world a certain way. And it just so happens the way I interpreted the world as a kid, even going to public school, was that science really didn't know what it was talking about, because L. Ron Hubbard said different. And that there is this hidden subconscious part of our mind that is always operating, because L. Ron Hubbard said it is. And it didn't matter what psychology had to say, or what any of my teachers had to say, or anybody else had to say, really. If L. Ron Hubbard said it, that was as good as gold. And that was how I valued things. And that was kind of my moral upbringing. And there was good and bad with that. I learned a very strict moral code, and I tried very hard to be rigorously honest as a kid. Probably a plus, because I didn't hide too much from my parents. And if I did, well, they found out about it before too long. And so, so it kept up a pretty decent relationship with my folks because of that. Things like that. There's some positives there. I don't think it's all bad, but then there's these other negative things like this reactive mind, and the fact that you dare not speak around anybody who is injured. And fascinating idea, but it's not really rooted in anything real. It's rooted in the idea that if you're in a situation where there's pain and unconsciousness, you're recording subconsciously every word and phrase and everything that's being said, and those words are going to come back on you later on and ruin your life. In Scientology, they call those engrams. There's a whole dictionary, it's about this thick, specialized terminology in Scientology. And that is another point about these groups, is loaded language. Scientology is probably taken that concept of redefining words and ideas and concepts sometimes regular English words, like the word critical. Critical thinking in Scientology, critical is a bad word. If you're critical, if you're finding things to critique in Scientology, there's something seriously wrong with you. In fact, the only reason, and this is another thing I learned as a kid, the only reason why you would be critical of anything, especially Scientology, is because of your own moral transgressions, your what are called in Scientology, your overts, bad things you did against that person or group that you're being critical of. It's the only reason you're critical. It has nothing to do with the fact that they abused you, tortured you, made you work for no pay, locked you up. Doesn't have anything to do with any of that. It only has, the only reason you're being critical is because of your own overts, what you did, period. It's an absolute piece of information. And there are many such absolute pieces of information in Scientology and in all destructive cults. They only Sith deal in absolutes. So do Scientologists. And there's an awful lot of those kind of absolutes. And I grew up with those ideas. And so I'm just giving you a little flavor of what some of those ideas are, because I'm sure you can imagine how they might affect a person's worldview. Growing up as an 8, 9, 10-year-old thinking that this is how life is, and this is how I should be thinking about things. So what those kind of things do to you as a child is, in instances of actual bullying or abuse from adults or other children, oh, well, it must have been my fault. It's what I did. I can't go complain about that. I can't go talk about that. I can't tell anybody about that because that's me being critical of them. Clearly, that's on me. Then it creates this sort of mindset where being a victim is kind of, yeah, that's how it should, that's how it's supposed to be. So you can see then why when I was 15 years old, and I actually officially went down to a Church of Scientology in Santa Barbara. We lived out in California. That's where I was born and raised. I was kind of wide open to receiving the message. I didn't go in there with a critical frame of mind, because being critical is a bad thing, right? So instead, I'm like, eyes and ears wide open, very interested in what's being presented to me, but very non-skeptical about the whole thing, because I was raised in this environment of, well, let's just say it ran a little parallel, but a little different to the rest of the world. It's its own kind of world. It's what we call a bubble world, right? And that was the world that I kind of semi-lived in as a kid. And you'd bump up against the bubble of the real world, and sometimes it was weird. It was an odd experience sometimes. Other times it was fine. I come in at 15 years old, can't talk to girls. I'm in high school. I'm kind of geeky. I read a lot of books, but I don't know a whole lot. And she sized me up in about 10 minutes and said, oh, your problem is you can't talk to girls. And I was like, how did you know? Like, how could this possibly be true that she could see this in me, right? I'm only a 15-year-old geeky kid who can't get dates. So I almost fall out of my chair with this awareness of me that she has. And that's the thing about cult recruitment, right? Is it's about getting your guard down. It's about opening up to them. It's about telling things about yourself that you might not be willing to tell a total stranger. But here's a person who, by their looks and by their manner and by how they're talking to you, appears to be your best friend, right? Or certainly appears to at least be friendly to you, compassionate to your problems, and interested in helping you. And that's a lot in this world to run into that out there, right? And we want that. We don't want to run away from that when it's happening. We don't want to look at that and go, danger, Will Robinson, right? No way. This can't be. I got to get the hell out of here. You're too nice. That would not really even be appropriate in that circumstance. So you go, well, how am I supposed to know? Well, there's other red flags we can get into. But I just wanted to kind of put that there as to, you know, how did I get in? Well, I got in the way most people get in. I had a problem, or I had a trauma, I had an issue, and this was a helping hand. And no one joins a cult, ever. No one thinks that's what they're doing. What? This isn't a cult. This is a self-help group. This is a yoga class. This is an acting class. This is a karate dojo. This is a business. This is a church. This is whatever guise it takes. And all of the above have been destructive cults. So that's what they think they're joining, is there's layer upon layer of deception to such groups. What they present as in the public is very, very different from, as you ascend those levels of indoctrination and they're more and more trusted and you're more and more in the group, more and more about the group is revealed to you. And it's impossible for such groups to engage in informed consent. They can't tell you everything on day one, because then they spill in all the beans and you wouldn't have any reason to stay or continue. You'd be making judgments based on what you're hearing right there. And they're like, oh, no, 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 you're not ready yet for that. You're not primed is what they actually mean, right? You haven't been set up and conditioned to yet accept those crazy ass Xenu beliefs, pardon my French. So they're gonna prep you for that. And there's a whole, you know, in Scientology, for example, there are aliens and there are past civilizations and there are space Star Wars-y Matrix-like realities that are communicated. And Scientologists love those movies for that exact reason, because they're tuned into how things really are. See, I used to love those movies. I still do, but for whole different reasons now. So, you know, when you look at Matrix as a documentary, you know, okay. But that's how we used to kind of think about it, right? Not that there's a computer simulation, but the idea of us being in a prison. Scientology often refers to Earth life as a prison planet. And it's just bizarre coincidence that it really is that Alex Jones happens to have a website called prisonplanet.com. But it's not totally bizarre coincidence that he did have a Scientologist working for him at one point. That's the only connection I will make there. I'm not implying any deeper conspiracy. Anyway, so you see some of the nonsense that goes on here, but it was very inviting to me as a 15-year-old uncritical person. And so I signed right up. And I started doing a communications class, and I thought it helped me with girls, even though I really didn't get any more dates. And I left high school still with that and zero. But, you know, there's this thing called belief. And when somebody's telling you you're better at something, and when the group is collectively especially reinforcing that, and you're part of this new group now, you've made friends in this group, these are people you trust. And by this group, of course, I'm referring to the local Church of Scientology that I now became part of as a teenager. And I was doing services there regularly. And Scientology is awful business-like in that it sells classes and it sells what you might call personal counseling sessions, although that would be a misnomer to call it counseling. It's what they call auditing. And it looks and is described in therapeutic terms, but it is sort of anti-therapeutic at a psychological level. And I only get to say that with a certain degree of certainty now because I went and got a damn degree in psychology so I could understand the topic enough to really get, is this actually just something that is vanilla and neutral and pseudoscience and it's just kind of ridiculous and people spend thousands and thousands of dollars for this stuff, but it's really not doing anything? And research indicates, no, it's actually not just doing nothing, it's actually harmful to a person and sticks them into a framework of thinking, a way of thinking that is very narcissistic, very egotistical, and at the same time, very victimizing. It's bizarre and complicated, but auditing is not good for you. And I only take such pains to say so because when I throw out the word counseling, I don't want you all getting the wrong idea. It's not just some other form of therapy. It's not. That being said, what it does do, and what I experienced early on, is it creates euphoria. It creates awe. It creates moments of awe, not dissimilar to drug experiences, falling in love, going to a concert, you know, these kinds of feelings that we crave and pay lots of money for. Those are those pleasure moments of life, those great times when you're really high and really loving everybody and everything and you feel connected. Scientology audit team, through trance induction and hypnotic repetition, can create that in a person. And the indoctrination of the auditing lines a person up and primes them for it. There are certain expectations, and you're not done with the auditing until those marks have been achieved. In other words, you could be in an auditing session for 7 or 8 hours, and we're not done until you hit that high point. So after a while, you kind of learn how to hit those high points yourself just to get the hell out of there. And some are better than others, but you're always chasing like an addiction. And I liken it to that for a reason. I believe neurologically, it's the same kind of thing. The auditing produces this euphoric awe state, and it feels amazing. And it feels like you've touched into, like when a person's on drugs, for example, a whole different level of reality, and it's very real. And this level of reality involves past lives and space opera, as Hubbard calls it, right? Spaceships and past civilizations in your past lives. It wasn't all just here on Earth. Earth has just been around for X amount of time. The universe has been around for, you know, according to L. Ron Hubbard, 4 quadrillion years. That's a really long time. And a lot's happened in that time, according to him. In fact, everything has happened in that time. There really isn't anything you can imagine that you haven't experienced. And in your auditing, as you continue to do it, as I continue to do it as a teenager getting into this and learning about this and experiencing this for myself, you know, hey, seeing is believing. I wish it wasn't, because I saw all kinds of things in my auditing sessions that had nothing to do with reality. Had to do with my imagination. And interestingly, one definition of hypnotism is guided imagination. And that's very much what's going on in Scientology auditing. So again, experiencing this with uncritical eyes, having been raised in this, I accepted all of this. And I went, oh, hell yeah, let's bring it, you know? And I couldn't wait to get that auditing. My parents had been doing it my whole life. Their friends, right? You know, the people I grew up with, their parents were all Scientologists. That was our social net. And so, so experiencing auditing to me was, yeah, finally, I'm going to get some of this. And it creates this awe, euphoria experience. And that is the convincer. That's the subjective experience a person has to have that sells them on the thing. And not everybody who goes in to try auditing gets it. There's a whole bunch of people who go in and it doesn't do a whole lot for them at all, because they don't go into trance, or they don't subsume to it, or they don't buy into the indoctrination part of it, and so don't put themselves in the necessary headspace. And I'm sorry that I'm speaking in these kind of general terms, but trying to describe a very complicated process in a simple way. But for whatever reason, they don't fully go along with or are not susceptible to the techniques that are being used on them, and they walk right back out the door. This isn't something that works on everybody. The fact is, though, I've come to learn, if that doesn't work on you, this other thing might. And that's why Scientology doesn't just use auditing to get people in. It's got training and books and lectures and various other things it can do to try to entice you into this whole money-making process, this whole scammy kind of thing. Because since I didn't say it yet, and this is another thing I always try to throw out early on, it is a money-making scam. I don't believe it's a religion. But I believe an awful lot of people do think it's a religion, and in the eyes of the law, that kind of puts it there. I have a few other more academic level things to say about that, but you know, people believe what they want to believe. Now, as far as my experiences in Scientology go, I was recruited in 2 years to work for the church, and I worked for Santa Barbara's Church of Scientology for 8 years until 1995, and that was fresh out of high school. Struggled, working other jobs. Most of the experience there was getting about $4 a week in pay. It was classified as a religious volunteer. So I was working 40, 50, 60-hour weeks there for the mission, for the ideal of it, thinking I was saving the world, because when I was recruited to join staff, I was recruited not just on the idea of this is really great stuff, but this is actually the only stuff. And I should probably highlight that, because that's another important aspect of these groups, is we have the truth with a capital T. And we have the only means, and L. Ron Hubbard wrote, dare I say, scripture that reflects that attitude, that there is nothing else, not only on this planet, but in this whole universe, that is more important than, or more far-reaching, or more necessary to mankind's survival in Scientology. And I'll tell you a funny little snippet on this. Oh boy, I'm running out of time so fast. They have invested hundreds of millions of dollars at this point in preserving L. Ron Hubbard's words on nickel-plated records. He gave over 5,000 lectures during his lifetime, by the way. He talked a lot. And all of his lectures were recorded have been preserved on nickel-plated records and on titanium sheets, all the written works. And he has hundreds of thousands of pages of writings, and between books and issues and policy letters and manuscripts. This is all preserved with cutting edge preservation technology in hermetically sealed containers in concrete vaults in the ground out in Trementia, New Mexico. And they have a site they were trying to dig out in Wyoming. There's a couple out in California. These are all super confidential locations, but they're all over the internet, just like Xenu is. And that's there to preserve L. Ron Hubbard's legacy in the case of a nuclear annihilation. Those bunkers are designed to survive that, so that should the world destroy itself, the next evolution of life will discover L. Ron Hubbard. And not only all that material, but dictionaries, encyclopedias, solar-powered record players. So if they don't have electricity, they can play the records anyway and hear them. They have really thought this through. And that's just one little subunit of the Church of Scientology that has invested hundreds of millions of dollars in that project. So they're very serious about L. Ron Hubbard and preserving his legacy. And, you know, that's Stalin-esque. I mean, there's like, it's hard to imagine another individual in history who has had that much attention paid to their words and deeds, you know, by another group of people. But that's kind of what these groups can get up to, is this intensely focused dedication toward an individual or an ideal. And that's actually, psychologically speaking, one of the dangers of groups like this, or of extremism, if you will, in general, is taking a belief set or an idea and taking it to a point where it's unquestioningly true. There can be no doubt this is true. And if you dare question this, well, how dare you? Who are you to question the validity of this? And once you're in that headspace, well, ethically and morally speaking, anything is possible. And that's the danger of this. And that's actually, in a nutshell, why I talk about this stuff. So not only did I join staff in Santa Barbara, but after 8 years of that, I doubled down, because I'd been there for 8 years. And Santa Barbara, you might not know of as a Scientology city. I failed in my mission. That's what we were trying to do, is we were trying to get Scientology going and going and going. And yet we really never had more than about 100 people show up at our yearly Christmas dinner. I mean, it was just not happening. And I was very frustrated by this because I was a very idealistic young man and I really wanted to save the world. I really did. And I really thought Scientology was the avenue to do it because that's what I'd been told my entire life. So I was all in. And despite the 60-hour work weeks and having to work another job and struggling with a place to live, even living in the church for about 2 years in a bedroom in one of the auditing spaces, you know, really giving it my all, going down to LA for Los Angeles for full-time training, quitting my other work, quitting my whole life for the cause, to go down there for about 3 or 4 months at a time and do training down there and come back. And that was where I became familiar with this group called the Sea Organization. Has anybody ever heard of the Sea Organization? Okay, so the Sea Organization, SEA. Okay, this is not accurate. I keep being told this isn't accurate, but it's the best analogy I have, is you have the Catholic Church and you got the Vatican. And kind of everything is kind of run out of the Vatican. If the Vatican disappeared tomorrow, Catholicism would kind of not really be, people would still know about it, but it really wouldn't be run and operated anymore. That's what the Sea Org is for Scientology. It's the central core of it. And it's made up of people who have dedicated their lives to Scientology. That's where you might have heard about the billion-year contract. People sign contract. It's a symbolic thing. It's not a legal document. But they sign for 1 billion years. I'm doing it. I'm on board, right? I now refer to, after having done it for 17 years, because that's what I graduated into, was the Sea Organization. And I first bumped into them in Los Angeles when I was doing training as a staff member. These are people who wear naval uniforms. They salute, yes sir, no sir, how high sir. It's a full lifestyle change. And it's a full-time thing. It's 24/7. You don't go into the Sea Org and still have an outside job, friends, connections, go to the movie on Saturday night. None of that's in your life anymore. You're dedicated. It's monastic in a way, right? Except it's not in a monastery and it's not quiet. It's very loud because there's an awful lot of screaming and yelling going on there. It's an incredibly abusive environment. And the only way that I really know how to describe the intensity of it in any way that I think makes sense is, imagine if you lived at boot camp. Or if your job for literally 18 hours a day with half-hour breaks for lunch and dinner was in a boiler room and you had to sell penny stocks, and that's your job. Get to it. And if you're not producing, if you're not earning, you're on the floor doing push-ups or sit-ups, or you're running around the block taking a lap, or you're up until 4 in the morning cleaning the trash cans because you didn't make your quota. That's life in the Sea Org. And I went into that. Now, I didn't go into that knowing what I just told you. Because like I mentioned earlier, there are layers, there are levels to this. And there's a public layer, and then there's the layers that are slowly revealed to you as you go further and further into these groups. No one is talking to you about the Sea Organization on day 1 or day 2, or even year 1 or year 2. But after 8 years, I was like, sign me up, because I thought full-time, dedicated, on purpose was the term we use. There's a purpose in Scientology. And if you're either on that purpose or you're off that purpose. And if you're off purpose, well, I pity you. You want to be on purpose, right? You want to be on the goal. And in fact, just thought of this, ethics is a term in Scientology that is used, misdefined, you could say, to entail its entire justice system and its system of discipline. It's the ethics and justice system of Scientology. In fact, they have an entire book called The Introduction to Scientology Ethics. That book was entered into evidence in Danny Masterson's trial, because in that book are high crimes in Scientology's justice system, such as you will not go to outside authorities without the permission of the Church of Scientology first for any complaint against any other Scientologist. Period. End of story. You may not even get a divorce. You may not initiate legal proceedings or contact outside authorities about a Scientologist without our permission. And if you do, we will expel you and declare you, call you a suppressive person, and open you up to any number of awful things as are being displayed in this trial right now. So ethics, even loaded language in Scientology for the trouble you're going to get into if you buck the system or don't go along with what's going on. Well, that was taken to a level I did not even know was possible in the Sea Org. And I worked in the Sea Org for 17 years before I finally was like, okay, I need a life change. This is way too much. I was back when I was, I think, 42 years old. It was 2012, 2013, when I'd finally had enough, woke up to what was really kind of going on. And even then, well, okay, let me fill in a couple of the blanks during that time really fast. While I was in the Sea Org, I worked for the management of Scientology for the Western United States, west of the Mississippi out to Hawaii. There are 34 churches of Scientology and organizations there, and I helped manage them. I literally gave directions as to what to do. And they are a tightly controlled group. They look like a friendly bunch of people when you go talk to them, but again, you get inside a few layers and you find these very, there will be blood on the walls kind of orders and directions to them if they don't meet those quotas that they are assigned. And it gets to be a bit grueling. Well, I was part of that. I became part of that machinery of that activity. And I did that for the first about 8 or 9 years of my Sea Org existence until I kind of burned out on that, because issuing orders about blood on the walls and being yelled and screamed at and all that other nonsense, I could talk about that, but I'm trying to just kind of condense it into, it was awful. And yet I was doing it because I thought, this is awful, but there's martyrs in all religions. I mean, you got to do what you got to do. Nobody said this was going to be easy. We're trying to save the world here. We're trying to push back against a group of people who are so zombieized by their reactive mind and their engrams and all these imaginary demons that had been created for us by L. Ron Hubbard in his mythology of Dianetics and Scientology. I didn't need Xenu. I had plenty of other stuff to fall back on as to what was wrong with everybody, as to why they needed to be saved despite themselves. And we see this, over and over and over again in popular news and media. This is nothing new or unique or special to Scientology. It's just L. Ron Hubbard's brand of it. And I had, again, been raised in it. And so I bought into all of that and fought hard to stay in and keep going. Even at one point, I broke the rules really hard. And I ended up in a little kind of prison system of theirs. They internalized this justice thing. Well, they'll put you in a little prison called the Rehabilitation Project Force. Rehabilitation. I found out the hard way after 3 years of that, of hard physical labor for about let's say about 12 hours a day, 5 hours of enhancement. The rest, about 12 hours a day of hard physical labor to, get your head straight and get you under control, really. And then 5 hours of a heavy indoctrination in Scientology techniques and more of that auditing under duress. This is in no way under any metric would you consider this therapeutic counseling at this point. It is a kind of confessional. It is called a security check, not really auditing. And you have to confess all your crimes. 3 years I went through a program of that, of uncovering crime after crime after crime that I must have committed in order to have landed in this horrible place, right? To have violated the rules so badly. And it took me 3 years to get through that program and graduate from it a fully rehabilitated Sea Org member. That was fun. So through all that experience, right, that actually was one of the things that kind of started getting my head on straight about what was really going on, because you can't do that kind of activity. You either go all in, back in, or you start seeing something's kind of wrong here. And that was really the point that I started looking around and going, something's seriously, seriously wrong with this. And I knew organizationally, I knew like at that level, like at what I was doing, this is off. But it wasn't till I actually left the Sea Org officially and fully in 2013 and got on the internet. And I hope it's kind of obvious at this point why I wasn't on the internet up until then. I was self-policing and thought policing myself because I was so intensely focused on this, as were every other Sea Org member I knew. I wasn't some unique, special, dedicated person. I wasn't even a very good Sea Org member if you listen to them. I was actually a very good Sea Org member, but you know, we were all in that bubble. And the more you put yourself in the bubble, and the more you put yourself in the bubble of belief, it becomes, as Lawrence Wright so poetically, brilliantly said, it is a prison of belief. It becomes your own prison that you've created for yourself, where all the walls that exist around you are in here. No one will ever imprison you in a more powerful dungeon than you can create for yourself. And that's where I was, because there's this thing called, there's so many mechanisms to this that I want to tell you about, and I have to go kind of quickly. In these prisons of belief, the things that make them up are only a few. There's a handful of things, right? There's about 8 methods of control I've come to learn that create these prisons of belief. And if you can control somebody's environment, for example, you're well on your way to controlling their thoughts and feelings. And if, by the way, if you control their feelings, you don't have to control their thoughts, you got to control their feelings. It's all about emotional manipulation. It's big, big on the radar. How do you do that? Special knowledge. We've got knowledge nobody else has, and we're going to let you in on it. It can be manipulative. It can be really manipulative, especially if the knowledge doesn't happen to be true. But objective truth is a relative thing, so I'm not going to argue that tonight. Everybody's got their ideas of right, wrong, good, bad, etc., and what we are willing to accept or believe, and what levels of evidence we have. But there are information out there that are not entirely faith-based that you can make scientific judgments about. We all know about this. And some of L. Ron Hubbard's claims, you know, don't really hold up to any scientific standard of any kind, and they're not faith-based. But Scientologists believe that they are scientifically based and that this is reality. And if you just ignore all those stupid scientists who disagree with him, then it all makes perfect sense. I've spent 10 years on YouTube unraveling how it doesn't make sense. And most of that was for my own sake. And then the audience just kind of went along with it, you know, but it was like unraveling this has been a years-long process for me. But that special knowledge is a factor. It's a key factor to controlling people. If they think that you've got something for them that's going to give them a leg up on everybody else, or is going to let them in on some sacred information, this is what drives conspiracy theorists, is that they have sacred knowledge. Controlling relationships. The further I got into Scientology, the less non-Scientologists I knew, and the more under the control or framework or structure of the church I was. So social contacts and relationships are everything. Do you have a varied set of relationships with people of disparate beliefs, or are you in an echo chamber? Cults specialize in echo chambering people. That's the entire purpose of the activity, is to get you into a relationship situation where your friends, your family will all be pressuring you to stay in the group, to follow the group, to be part of the group. It becomes a whole different level of group think. And it's powerful stuff. And another aspect is creating an us versus them. Now, every single group that exists has us versus them to some degree. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a group. You wouldn't be identifying as that, right? So if you're in a group, you got that. But what cults do, and certainly what the Sea Org did and what Scientology did to my headspace, was dial it up to 11, as I say, right? From Spinal Tap, is you just take it and you take it and you take it to the nth degree, where we are so special, us. We're so good. We're so elevated. We are such intelligent people. Whatever metric you care to use, it really doesn't matter. We're the most best dressed. We're the classiest. We are the smarmiest. We are the snobbiest. We are whatever. If you're the best at it, people want to be on board. And so, you know, you can present that way. And if you get people thinking that that membership alone gives them that status and privilege and place in the hierarchy, it's psychologically powerful as a mechanism. So this goes so obviously true in the Sea Org that you have ranks and ratings, where you know petty officers and stuff like this. It's like it has as much literal value as the Salvation Armies. I mean, it's really just an internally driven thing. But in the Sea Org, people vie for these positions and will work hard. And they're already working hard. I hope I communicated that it was pretty hard. They'll work even harder for status. It's all about status, right? This is instinctive level stuff that drives us. And cults take those instincts and they just ratchet them up to the level of creating so much anxiety and concern about those things that you are looking to the group for your answers and you don't even think to look outside the group, because the group is the place with all the sacred knowledge and special stuff. And you can't get it anywhere else. So you got to stay, right? And for Scientologists, just as what is the carrot that they're chasing, maybe I should have started with that, but it's personal spiritual freedom and immortality. Realized that they, as a spiritual entity, they're not their body. They look at the whole past lives thing and future lives and all of that as, I am a spiritual entity who is going to live forever. And Scientology is going to put me back into my godlike state that I used to be in so that I can create my future any way I want and not be stuck on this prison planet life after life and sort of break free in a similar way to maybe how Westerners understand Buddhism, right? That Buddhism is breaking the chains of this wheel of time that you're trapped in. Hubbard drew from that in putting Scientology together. So that was the kind of ultimate goal and prize we were chasing. And I, for one, considered it very valuable. I wanted it for you. I wanted it for you. I wanted it for everybody. I wanted that goal. You know, and so I was willing to put up with years of physical abuse and nonsense and yelling and screaming and boot camp-like conditions and all of that to try to attain that. And people often wonder, why are people in these groups? Why do they stick with it? Why do they do that? Well, the answers are as clear as they are for women who stay in domestic abuse situations. It's because they don't really think they have much of a choice otherwise, for any number of reasons, and because the abuser, in this case the cult, but the dynamics of this, the way the techniques and methods of this are same. The abuser convinces the victim they need them, that they have to have them in their lives, that they will be nothing without them, that they will fall apart without them. And unfortunately, the victim gets in a state of mind where they believe that through what's called trauma bonding, because it's not all abusive. There's intermittent rewards. And we would get some sometimes. We'd get to go out to the movies on Saturday. We'd get a little prize, get a little bonus, get some money, get some of this, get some of that, get a smile, get a laugh, get a tap on the head by our seniors. And that's what chasing that is what kept us going, not the abusive part. The abusive part we endured. Chasing those pleasure moments, those moments where things were good and the sails were smooth and it looked like we were actually succeeding. And you get enough of those often enough and you'll stay with it. And that's why cult members stick in situations that you look at from the outside and you go, who would do that? Why would you do that? Well, I hope in this hour that I've offered some answers to those questions. And this was all kind of off the cuff, so I hope I didn't miss anything, but now we're gonna go into questions, I think, yeah, or do you, great. So I tried to time this for that, so fire away, yes. Oh.
My sister-in-law and her husband and her 2 children lived at the Celebrity Center in Los Angeles. You might know Jane and Rob Bozan.
Oh my God. Yes, I do.
He's an absolute prick. And
okay.
Say it, you can. She's an idiot. But, you know, we hadn't seen them for about 15 years, maybe a little bit longer. We went to visit some friends in Manhattan Beach, and James contacted her. And she said she'd go out for lunch with us. So we drove about 2 hours. We get there. She's in the middle of an assist. And she sends her son, Danny, and she had 2 kids. I don't remember the other one's name. I hadn't seen him in over 40 years. And he came out, he was like a friggin' robot. Mm-hmm. And I'm sitting there saying, you know, she had a normal life for over 30 years in Ohio. She was very popular in high school. She marries this idiot. She gets involved, and she would send us Christmas presents of L. Ron Hubbard's books, which I would throw in the garbage, and I went to send her books about the Talmud. But James said not to do that. But they were just so, you know, like the only thing that I found odd about what you were saying is that critical was, you weren't supposed to do that, except you are supposed to do that for people who aren't part of the group.
Yes. I'm sorry that I wasn't clearer that that was internalized. Yes.
She said, you know, before you criticize it, why don't you take it for it? I went into one of those, I walked out in about 15 minutes. I thought the people were idiots. And I just said, this is ridiculous. They're just trying to play with me. Mm-hmm. And so I'm sitting there, and I had so much trouble understanding how, what got her really excited was their position on Ritalin for kids who had ADD, and she felt that they did a lot of good about that, and she didn't stop proselytizing. You couldn't talk to her for 5 minutes without conversation turning on Ritalin, and Scientology is the only organization that actually cares about it. So it got to a point where I didn't want to talk to her. And I felt that by going to she first was in Clearwater and then went to the Celebrity Center. And I felt that, well, she has a home, let her stay there. She's comfortable. Sure. And if people actually like Raw, because I never met anybody who did, but if people like Raw, fine, I don't care. But what I did care about was that I felt that it was abusive to force their children into it. Mm-hmm. They grew up at the centers, and they both left. One of them is still involved. The other one wants nothing to do with it. I'm sorry. Yeah. The question is, you said that you escaped, and to escape something implies that somebody tried to stop you or used. I want to know what your escape entailed, as mm-hmm. opposed to just walking out the door.
Right. It was a 9-month process for me where I let the church know that, oh, no worries. There's 2 ways of leaving the Church of Scientology, which is officially or unofficially. Officially is you follow the channels and the guides and the rules. Unofficially is you get up and leave. And some people have in the past, and probably the present, although I have been out for a number of years, so I can't speak to that, have been physically stopped, physically imprisoned, held against their will because they didn't know what they were doing, and that kind of thing, in order to keep them from leaving. That has absolutely documented happened in the Church of Scientology. In my case, I still believed, when I saw the craziness of the organization, the money hunger of it, and the fact that all attention was riveted 24/7 on money. And even for me as a fanatical Scientologist, it had gone too far. I thought, okay, I don't want to be part of the organization anymore, but I still believe in the movement. I still believe in the ideals. I still believe that L. Ron Hubbard knew what he was talking about. And that's what getting on the internet cured me of, because then I had to get L. Ron Hubbard's real life story, not the church's version. And I needed to get the stories I hadn't heard from people that I used to know who had been posting on the internet, who had left years ago. Well, when they leave, you don't hear from them anymore. It's not like I had access to their stories or the internet. So I didn't see any of that. So I was still living in this bubble world of belief that Scientology and L. Ron Hubbard were as they were represented. And so I have followed official channels, which required confessionals and more holding the cans on those e-meters, those electronic devices they use, basically lie detectors. They don't work. And it's hilariously bad, actually, how far off it is. But I went through that whole process, and I cooperated because my parents had actually since then had gotten out. I was the last one to leave. But they had not made nuisances of themselves. They had not spoken out. They had just kind of faded, just stopped returning calls, stopped going. And they were high enough up and distant enough that they could kind of get away with that and nobody was going to give them too much hassle. That's okay. You can leave Scientology that way and they're not going to go through your trash. You got to do what I did to get that happening, right? Which is speaking out. And that's what I've been doing for the last 10 years. So that's what they don't like. And so my escape was more a psychological escape, I guess you could say, because I didn't physically run. While I was in, I did do that once, but then I came back because I left my wife. I was married and I wanted to get her back to her. And then they re-indoctrinated me, basically. So that happened, but I came back.
One question for me. Do you think L. Ron Hubbard plan was to make a cult, or was he just a writer that wrote this up and then it kind of took on a life of his own? Or was he actually really thinking of making this cult himself?
I think he thought the idea, and he's been quoted in 3 different places as having said that the easiest way to make money is to start a religion. He definitely noted that, and he had lots of examples in 1940s and 50s to look at for that, right? So he said, and L. Ron Hubbard's superpower was the gift of gab. The man was incredible at storytelling. And he was charismatic. Mike Rinder, who's doing the media circuit right now because he was a high-level Scientologist who wrote a book, he knew L. Ron Hubbard. He worked under him for years. And I interviewed him on my podcast, and he said L. Ron Hubbard was not only the consummate, charismatic bullshitter, but he was the guy who you knew when he came in the room. He was never the guy in the corner. When he walked in, everybody was aware of it. And he was this kind of guy. And so he could be domineering and dominating. And he was, really, while that all sounds positive, fact is he was an abusive predator and he was a serial philanderer and he, lots of other things. Now, that all being said, Dianetics went viral. Dianetics took off in 1950. It was a legit bestseller, and L. Ron Hubbard suddenly had a lot of money very quickly, and he was horrible saving it. He bankrupted Dianetics twice. He got a bailout, and he bankrupted and screwed the guy over who bailed him out. Then he started Scientology. This is 1953, and the Church of Scientology becomes a thing. And it was only in the ruins of not being able to make his quasi-science work that he started the religion. And he started it with about 50 people. That was what it had been reduced down to. They would listen to his stories and they would give him money and they'd buy his stuff. And so he kind of started it going. And this was in Phoenix, Arizona. And I believe it was around that time between Kansas and Phoenix, 52, 53, that he started thinking, this could actually be something amazing. This could be something that could set me up for the rest of my life. I could make an awful lot of money on this if I don't screw it up. And he had a number of people around him in his inner circle, his new wife, his third and final wife, and a few other people who had enough business sense to keep him from bankrupting it. And it was because of that that it built up and became the kind of thing it did.
Yeah, Chris, I was interested when you were mentioning I think it's a business. Some people think it's a religion. It seems to me, it just strikes me that if they're going to spend tens of millions to embed his writings and speeches on nickel and platinum, protected from a nuclear war or something, that suggests to me that at the highest levels, there have to at least be some element of true believers, and then others perhaps that are cynics, see through it, recognize they're just going to make money and party with it. So if you had to kind of quantify, to the extent you know, the highest levels, highest upper levels that are cynics versus true believers, well, where do you kind of feel that to be?
This might be surprising, and I'm glad you've asked me this, because I want to be clear. 100% of Scientologists are true believers. 100%. Now, it might be David Miscavige. It's an entirely subjective question as to his headspace. I really don't know. David Miscavige is the current leader of Scientology. He is the commander-in-chief. He is the guy who calls all the shots, and he is also an incredibly physically abusive man. There are numerous testimonials from people who were directly under him that he would regularly beat them. And there are many, many other financial shenanigans and reports of other nonsense, including locking people up in a room smaller than this for months at a time and demanding all kinds of loyalty tests and physical abuses and real nonsense. It was called The Hole, and they put people in it, and it was quite awful. So that's the guy who heads the church now. He was raised in Scientology just like I was. He's never known a worldview that is not Scientology. And yet he's a little bit, I'm not going to throw psychiatric labels around, but he's definitely an abusive personality. So, wow, but that's the guy at the top. He's the one who's actually benefiting from all of this. And he's really, at the end of the day, the only one benefiting, because everybody else below him in the hierarchy suffers. That's, as again, according to every testimonial of every person, and there have been about 10 or 12 of them who worked directly under him, who had things to say once they finally escaped. Yes.
So my question is a little bit weird in that I don't think much of Scientology, but at the same time, I think of it in terms of other religions. And, something you mentioned, what is the difference between Scientology as a cult and its abusive cult? But I think to myself, I listened to a podcast that said that every religion is just a cult that lasted long enough.
Sure.
Basically.
Mm-hmm.
And every religion that I've studied almost certainly had these stages and times when there was abuse and horrible things. I mean, I don't think you can really look at any major world religion and not see that to some extent. So my question is basically, why do you think, you seem to classify Scientology as especially bad, but I really don't see it in terms of just religion in general as really that much worse or should be treated any differently than we treat any other cult that gains enough popularity. Now, I don't think Scientology is probably going to get there because it's just not popular enough, but it could. And at that point, it'll be called a religion.
Well, it's already, okay, fair enough. It's already called a religion, and it's already recognized as a religion in the courts and receives religious protection for the levels of abuse that it inflicts on its members. They hide behind the First Amendment, and they get that protection in the courts because of that. I don't think that's right, especially when we're talking about child abuse. And I did not open that door tonight, but I could. There's an awful lot there to talk about. I guess my question comes down with this kind of approach is, well, does the end justify the means? And I don't think it does. You're not wrong. I believe that every major religion on this planet started in a destructive cult phase because I believe that some elements of what they engage in are necessary for its survival as a young, tiny little group of people who are going to be put out by the world if they're not dedicated, loyal, fiercely, striving to achieve the goals of the group. Problem becomes you can have, loyalty and dedication without beating up on people, and especially without beating up on kids. And that's what we have in Scientology, is we have a labor trafficking organization disguised as a religion. And it's enriching one person at the expense of tens of thousands of people's lives. That's not okay on any moral plane I can think of. And that's why I speak out against them. It might well be that, like the Mormon Church, which is also another level of cult, they mainstream over the next 100, 200, 300 years, and their beliefs tenor down a little bit. They calm down on some of the abusive stuff. They chill out. Great. But it doesn't justify any of the behavior that they're engaged in at this time. And it's the abusive aspects of Scientology that I speak out against, not the belief set. In fact, and I really should have stressed this earlier, and I'm sorry I didn't, the things that make a cult or a high control group, authoritarian group, totalist group, there's a lot of labels that we can throw around on this, but it is the actions of these groups that are being protested, not its beliefs. It has nothing to do with Xenu. It has everything to do with locking kids in closets. And that's what Scientology does. I didn't come tonight to like really get into all the salacious details of Scientology. I wanted to talk about it a bit more broadly, but we can drill down into those details if needed to show that I'm not talking about just another group with some oddball beliefs. I am talking about a group that violates people's human and civil rights on a daily basis. That's what's wrong with it.
So one of the things I've been wondering, probably needs to raise up a little bit. One of the things I've been kind of troubled by lately is how frequently not so much religious movements have been just really weird and conspiracy connected, but in a broader sense, so many different places, there's these things that spring up that people are holding on to. And while there might not be the same level of institutional cohesion driving people, it does seem to be activating people to do things and problematically. And I wonder what your thoughts are about ways to counteract some of those movements. Basically.
Sure. At the sake of sounding Pollyannish, and I'm sorry, I don't want to come across, airy-fairy. What I see in your situation that you're positing there is that there's an awful lot of stress and trauma and anxiousness out there, and it's driving an awful lot of fight or flight kind of thinking in people. And this is a point I love making about cults and why cults are and what they do. It has to do with riling up a person's emotions. And it's very easy in our modern culture, with social media being the way that it is, and our news media and cable news especially being the way that they are, just the models. Year after year, month after month, day after day, literally hour after hour, we are inundated with alarmingly bad news about all levels of our society, right? From social issues to political issues to climate issues, jobs. All of it has something to be worried about. And you have no problem opening up your phone and looking at your Google News feed. I do every day. And here's the list of 20 things to be worried about that you didn't know about yesterday. And this kind of thing creates, I believe, a kind of permanent anxiety in us. And this is why society, we see already studies have shown with social media usage in teenage girls, for example, increased rates of suicide, because of this crazy social engagement at a scale that our minds have a hard time dealing with. When it's all the news all around the world every day and it's all bad, you start getting the idea that everything sucks everywhere. And so you start looking for answers as to why. What drove the world to such craziness? Well, the world's always been crazy. You're just a lot more aware of it now because of these devices. Is that bad? Not inherently, but it's what you do with it. And because we're not just Vulcans, we react to these stories. We have our own ideas that we project onto them. This shouldn't be. I don't want this to be happening. Why is there starvation there? Oh my God, this earthquake happened and all these people died. What's the latest in Ukraine? Like, it's just daily. And so this revs us up. People get looking for answers, and they're not looking for answers with the frontal lobes. They're looking for answers that make sense to them. Generally speaking, when you're in that state of mind, you're not learning new things, you're finding reasons to reinforce what you already think, called confirmation bias. It's a very powerful influencer in our thinking. You already believe something and you find all the facts that make it true, and you ignore all the facts that don't. We all do it. It's built into us. And that drives up our anxiety levels, and our search for more conspiracies finds more answers that dive us deeper into these wells, and before you know it, we're talking about QAnon or flat Earth. And I've been down both of those wells because a big part of Scientology is conspiracy theory, a big part of it. And so I used to be a conspiracy theorist, and I'm talking about Alex Jones following conspiracy theorists. And I used to use that knowledge, in fact, to recruit people into Scientology because I'd scare the hell out of them. And I didn't know that's what I was doing, by the way. I was scared as hell. And I was scaring them because I thought that's the appropriate place to be, because look at the world, you know. But then I got out of Scientology and I took a walk around town and I was like, this place isn't falling apart. There's not chaos in the streets. There's no riots going on over here. What am I so freaked out about? And it took years of doing that kind of thing to bring the levels down in my head. And it's not like I walk on water now. I'm just saying it's a lot different place to be than when you're in a cult mindset. Worry, trauma, concerns, problems we have that we don't know what to do anything about, that's all the fodder that leads people down roads that sometimes end up in really culty bad places. I think that's how it happens. No problem. So she asked whether I'm still in touch with anybody who's still in Scientology. And the answer is no, officially I am not. And the reason why I am not is because I am declared a suppressive person. I have been given a label by the Church of Scientology that makes me persona non grata. And in destructive cults, this is a common practice. It's called shunning anywhere else. We call it disconnection. JWs call it disfellowship. There's always different levels of this. I mean, in Islam, they'll kill you for it, apostasy. They won't kill you in Scientology, but they sometimes will make you wish you were dead. And that can happen. But the minimum punishment is disconnection. And that means that literally when I decided I'm out, I need to speak out about this, I need to say something, it was within about 3 days, I went from about 450 Facebook friends to about 100. Just like that, right? And the 100 that I had left were not close acquaintances. I lost people I had known for 20 years overnight. It was that stark of a difference. And I knew I would be having an impact on my life. You know, it's just when you're at that end of it, you know, when you're at the disconnecting end, you know, you get it in your head that they've gone to the dark side, they're evil, they must be destroyed. Okay, screw them, you know. But when you're on the receiving end of it, you suddenly see how it's not that way at all.
I'm curious, did you do this all through your, did you require counseling, or is it, I'd be nosy.
Oh, with my own recovery?
Yeah, I mean, was it counseling, or did you do all self-help?
No, I have, within the last year and a half, I have been receiving therapy, been receiving regular counseling. Up until then, it was education, baby. It was learn, learn, learn. And and starting my YouTube channel, I said from day one, and I still say this now, it's my journey. You know, all those interviews with psychologists and sociologists and even neuroscientists, I have gone down these wells trying to understand it for myself so I could understand it well enough to talk to other people about it. You know, and that's what caused me to pursue the university degree. But it was all in an effort of catharsis. Yeah. Fair, yeah.
Does Scientology prohibit the internet use by its members or in Sea Org or wherever?
Yes, yes, it does. It used to forbid it entirely. Now it curtails it with filtered access in a similar way to how Chinese internet works. They literally have wireless connections at Sea Org bases, for example, where the public or the staff can sign on, but they have to install a filter on the device before they're cleared to use it. So they don't look up any of those South Park episodes and find out about Xenu. Seriously. And that all, by the way, started after I left. Yeah. Yeah.
How do we reconcile the very public lives of celebrities and the very insular environment that you described?
Are you referring to, like, say, to Scientology celebrities? Yeah. Yes. Okay. So what you have with Scientology celebrities like Elizabeth Moss, for example, right, is a second-generation Scientologist. She was raised in it, just like I was, right? She never had a worldview that was not Scientology-oriented. So it's impossible for her to see that The Handmaid's Tale is Scientology writ large. She just doesn't see it. It's amazing that, yes, and she's out in the world. However, like me, there is one of the, you guys are going to love this. There is one of the most powerful words in the English language well, it's not in the English language, in the Scientology language, is the word N-theta. E-N-T-H-E-T-A, N-theta. That word will, on command, cause a Scientologist to shut down all of their thinking and refuse to consider the subject that you have labeled as N-theta, whether it's a bad media article about Scientology, anything on my channel, anything critical of Scientology, it's N-theta. We put it in a box over there, and we don't look at it, we don't talk about it, we don't even want to think about it. And we justify that by saying our view of Scientology is the only correct one. It's right there. L. Ron Hubbard, it's in his books, it's in his lectures. We've got it. I have full access to it. That's everything I need to know. I need not know anything else than that. Everything else is N-theta. And it shuts down. It is the most powerful thought-stopping cliche in all of Scientology, is just that, is embodied in that one word. Yeah, it's powerful stuff.
How much like Scientology are election deniers and people?
Same. Yeah, same.
You know, sometimes my husband will put on Tucker Carlson for 5.
Yeah. Yeah.
I sit there and say, why? I said, you know, it's predictable what he's going to say.
Hmm.
So he and Sean Hannity and, you know, all the Republicans who are supporting Trump, who were losing their voters when they said that the 2006, the insurrection was fake, that the election was stolen. About 8 different Republicans thought it was that he was crazy, and that they denied that they said they would have nothing to do with him. And now, of course, they're supporting him because all of their constituents want them to. And I sit there, and when I was listening to, I couldn't stop thinking about Donald Trump.
There is a book written by Steve Hassan, who was a former Moonie, called The Cult of Trump. It's a book I recommend, if for nothing else, so you can see a different framework than the Scientology one or the Moonie one, or like a religious one. Here's a non-religious cult. And it's not to say, and I want to be super, super clear about this, because I don't know everybody in this room, and I am not at all saying that just because somebody is sympathetic towards or supports Donald Trump, that makes them a cult member. That is not what I am saying. I am saying that there is a subgroup within that group of supporters who are rabid on the topic, and they cannot critically think on the subject. And that's when you've entered extremist/cult territory.
Do you ever think of going back, or do you ever miss anything of that cult? No, no, nothing.
No.
And do you have are there any books you'd recommend to read from L. Ron Hubbard?
From L. Ron Hubbard?
Yeah,
No, there are no books from L. Ron Hubbard I would recommend anybody read. However, I was hoping you were asking me about books I'd recommend, because I tell everybody universally this, the very first book that I found after I left that put me in the entire skeptic, critical thinking frame of mind is Carl Sagan's Demon Haunted World. And I cannot recommend enough. That book changed my life. And it didn't make Carl Sagan my new guru. Cult hopping is a thing. And what I wanted to do was figure out a way that there was no way I was going to go from one cult to another. And Carl Sagan is the one who put me on that path. So I credit him for a big chunk of my education and recovery was that book. Okay.
Thank you, Chris. That was informative. Thank you all again for coming tonight. We will be having one more speaker this year. As I said, J.R. Becker, December 4th. And then we will be beginning again in January of the new year. We will have more speakers. So hope to see you again. And if you haven't, please sign in. And if you can, make a donation for tonight's event. Thank you.